Hello students and welcome again to Legacy IAS Academy. In this lecture, we will be discussing what impacts will be there with respect to the US-China trade agreement on India. So what impact will India face because of this recent agreement that has come into force? So let's see what this agreement is all about, what was the genesis of it, and subsequently how it can impact the Indian economy. So what's the news all about? So what has happened is US and China, they were in a tariff war. Now why did this tariff war start in the first place? So basically US has a trade deficit with China. That means what? That means that USA is importing more from China as compared to the amount that it is exporting to China. That means USA's exports to China is quite less as compared to the amount it's importing from China, as a result of which there is trade deficit with of USA, that USA has trade deficit with respect to China. Now because of this, Trump basically read this to be as if China is ripping off USA. So Trump said that what is happening is USA is not having proper tariff policy. That is why the rest of the world is ripping off USA, is what Trump thought. Right, but that is not necessarily the case, because that can be possibly because your country is having a very high per capita income, so a lot of people are spending on luxurious products, so many different products. That is why the higher expenditure can be possibly there. However, he took a very unidimensional view and thought that that is because the rest of the world is ripping us off. So what we should do, he thought that we should now tax more the imports that are coming. Right, so import tax means what? Tariffs. We will increase the tariffs. So what did US do? So earlier the tariffs by US on Chinese goods were 10%. The tariffs by China on US goods were 10%. So what did Trump do? Trump simply started increasing the tariffs. So increased to 34%, then 104%, then finally it reached to the value of 145%. That means a thing worth $100 will now be bought at $245 by the US citizens, because 145% is the tariff on that. Now subsequent to which, China also started increasing their tariffs on the US exports. The US were exporting certain goods and services to China, so China also started taxing that and imposing tariffs on that and made it to reach 125%. So this is what was going on. Tariff after tariff were being imposed, which gave rise to the tariff war between US and China. Now, over here it was seen that, of course, the tariff war does not benefit anyone as such, it hampers both the countries, but it was probably hampering USA even more, because what had happened, USA for the first time saw, in the last few years, for the first time it saw a quarter wherein its growth shrank. So its growth had a negative growth rate. Now experts say that the entire impact of the tariff war did not even come into picture and still the growth is negative. So in the coming months it will be even worse. Right? So situation in US was not good because of this tariff war as well. At the same time, as far as China is concerned, China was also hit, but overall it did not suffer much. Why is that so? That is because the Chinese trade with US, or the Chinese exports specifically to US, went down. However, China's overall trade with the entire world increased by 6% year on year for Q1. Right? So did China suffer? Probably not much, but USA did. Subsequent to which, when there was a realization it's not helping anyone, specifically USA, they realized it's not helping them. So then what happened? They came together and they had a high level talk in Geneva, Switzerland, discussing what should we do about this. And subsequently they decided that they will temporarily walk back from the tariffs that have been imposed. That means they will lower the tariffs. So what has been done? Temporary 90-day tariff rollback. So the tariffs which USA imposed up to 145%, now they are brought down to 30%. Chinese also increased their tariffs. They have brought it down to 10%. Now, this is not forever. This is there for the present 90 days, and in the meanwhile they will see how to proceed further. So till the time they come up with a proper better solution or the future, they have discussed or come to an agreement to halt this tariff war and bring down the tariffs. Again, not exactly to the same level. Both countries were imposing 10%. China has completely brought until to bring it down to 10%. USA has brought down only to 30%, but this also will go down further to 10%. So that is a pause of 90 days. I hope that's clear. So this is what has happened. Now the question is, what will be the impact of this? Now, since the tariffs have been brought down, one thing is quite certain is that the trade between US and China will further increase. Remember, the trade had gone down. Now China's exports to US had gone down, although its overall trade was higher. But its trade with USA has gone down. Now that will again increase. So basically US and China trade is going to, of course it is going to surge now, and US-China bilateral trade in high value segments, electronics, etc., and in various other things, specifically the things in which the tariffs were so high have now been reduced, will again surge back to new heights. So if you look at this, the impact is clear with respect to the increased trade, but will it address the issue of trade deficit which was there on US? USA started this tariff war because it had a trade deficit. So will it solve the trade deficit problem? Absolutely not. It may even further increase the trade deficit, we don't know, but and everything else remaining constant, it will still remain. The trade deficit situation of USA will not improve. So if you look at it, USA's trade deficit in goods with China. So USA exports about $143.5 billion worth of goods and imports around $438.9 billion of goods. So close to $300 billion worth of trade deficit is there. Trade deficit is there with China. So USA has $300 billion worth of trade deficit with China. Will this be addressed? Absolutely not. So we go back to square one, and the major issue, which was the trade deficit, remains unaddressed. Now let us understand what are the concerns with respect to this decision on India. So some argue there will be some positive impact, some argue that there can be some negative impact. So some are arguing that the sectors such as pharmaceutical, activated pharmaceutical ingredients, gems, jewelries, engineering, etc., now these areas will see a better export from the Indian side is what is expected. However, others say that the investments that have been coming due to high tariffs on China could now return. Now what does this mean? This means that, see, since the tariffs were high on Chinese products, so the other countries were not investing much in China. They were still investing in China, but let's say earlier they were investing 100 units in China. So what they would have done, when tariffs increased, they would reduce this investment to 90. So this remaining 10 investment would be distributed among other countries, and India would be one such country. But now that the tariffs have gone down, now this 10 units which was being invested in other countries will go back to China. So that benefit will go back to China is what is said. Now what is the disadvantage for India over here? So the China plus one strategy that is there, it will fade away. What is China plus one strategy? So generally the companies etc. which were investing or dealing with China, they generally have China plus one strategy. Means I will deal with China plus I will have one additional partner, because if something unforeseen happens in China, it's an authoritarian rule. There is no democracy as such, and China goes crazy with tariff war, trade war, currency war, etc., etc. So generally the countries have another player. So if something goes wrong in China, I will have another player with me, another country, that can be India or any other country as well. So for different investors, different countries are there, India being one of them. Now since the tariff war was leading to increase in tariff, so more and more investors were looking towards that plus one country. For many, India would be that plus one country. Now the tariffs have gone down, so that plus one country is not required because the investments will go back to China. So the plus C plus, that is China plus one strategy, will fade away over here. Now, what can be the benefits to India? See, since the tariffs were quite high in USA, right, the production had already taken place and was continuing with the same pace, and the tariffs is high in USA. So USA will not be taking that much of, USA citizens will not be buying that much of Chinese products because high tariff, the prices will increase. So China could have then offloaded those goods in other countries including India, leading to dumping of goods from China in other countries including India. So India would have faced dumping of Chinese goods, as a result of which we would have procured more and more Chinese goods and less of Indian products, hampering the Indian company. Now that will not happen because the tariff has been brought down. So this is one positive for India. However, one negative also we have seen, that the C+1 strategy will now fade away. So all in all, this decision is a mixed bag of India. However, remember, it's temporary only for 90 days. Let's see what happens after that. Thank you.